listening to the Pro Bono Happy Hour. I'm Rena Glazer. Welcome back. Do you like listening to our show? We aim to inspire, inform, and maybe even entertain. If you're listening on iTunes or what's now known as Apple Podcasts, could you please take a moment to leave a review? It's quick and easy. Even I figured out how to do it, and technology and apps are not my thing. You could just leave a rating or add some comments, whatever you'd like. We'd appreciate the feedback, and it would make it easier for other listeners to find the show, spreading the word about pro bono and access to justice. Thanks so much for your help. Today we're talking to BJ Jensen from Paul Weiss. BJ spoke with us from New York City, and we discussed his career, the firm's pro bono program, being a relative newcomer to pro bono leadership, meaningful pro bono matters, and more. We hope you enjoy the conversation. BJ, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Let's jump right in. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background? In other words, tell us about you.
Sure. So I'm Canadian. I went to college and law school in Canada, worked a little bit in between, and then after law school I clerked for a couple of years and then came down to Paul Weiss in New York.
Okay, so that is a lot of material we want to follow up with. Why did you decide to become a lawyer?
I think it was the experience I had working in between college and law school that really shaped it. So I first was working in low-income housing communities in my hometown, and then joined the Canadian federal government working in Aboriginal health. And in both experiences, I was witnessing forms of systemic injustice that I really wanted to play a role in changing. And I realized that in order to have access to the important conversations that were happening around those issues, you needed to have further education and namely a law degree. So that's what brought me to law.
What attracted you as a college graduate to work for low-income housing? It's an interesting choice.
I think I was working with families particularly, like children and youth, but then also families. And I'd always loved working with children. And I don't know, it was just the direct impact of my efforts was so visible, which was really rewarding. And there was so much spirit in the communities I was working with. Yeah, so I think it was those two factors. I probably stumbled into it a little bit and then kept going back to it because I found it so rewarding.
That's cool. Now, at some point, you decide to leave Canada and move to New York, and you got to Paul Weiss. How did all that happen?
So it's funny, actually. I had never been to New York before my first year of law school, and I came down during spring break as a 1L for a conference at the UN. And so my second time ever being in the city was for my callback interviews the next year. So I was very much like the Canadian kid, excited for an opportunity to make it in the big city. And Paul Weiss recruited on campus in Montreal. So I interviewed with them and a couple of other firms and then came back. And everyone I met at Paul Weiss each person was so different, but really inspiring and interesting. And so I just had a really good feeling about the firm, and that's what made me choose Paul Weiss. But New York specifically, I think it was just an opportunity to live in, the center of it all. All the stereotypes about New York rang true for me.
I hear ya. I went to college in New York, and so I think there's that. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. So, as they say,
city and bright lights.
Yeah, exactly. So, tell me a little bit about your experience and sort of track at Paul Weiss.
Sure. So I summered a couple of times. So my relationship with Paul Weiss dates way back, but I only came back full-time as a litigation associate in 2013 after clerking, like I said. And I was a lit associate for 3 years, and then about a year ago, I started in my current position of Pro Bono Associate. Great.
Now, tell me about your practice. What type of litigation did you do?
I did a bit of everything. So Paul Weiss litigators don't specialize, or generally they train folks as general litigators. And so I was doing everything from big white-collar investigations to more standard civil litigation, on larger teams, on smaller teams, in New York, outside of New York, in federal court and in state court. But I always also had a fairly robust pro bono practice. So yeah, I was doing a little bit of everything.
And what was the draw to the litigation side of the law? Why do you think you pursued that?
I don't know. It just felt right. When I summered, I tried assignments in all sorts of different departments, but the litigation side was just, I found it really exciting. Paul Weiss has, great practice areas and everything, but has historically been a really strong litigation firm in particular, and so there was certainly an excitement about joining that community.
So you mentioned that while you were practicing in the commercial side as a litigation associate, you also had a robust pro bono practice. So what do you think sparked your passion for pro bono and access to justice?
It's hard to pinpoint exactly. In college, I studied international development, so I've always had an interest in poverty issues internationally or locally. And then, like I said, some of the work opportunities I had showed the role that law can play in those issues. And then as I went to law school and increasingly appreciated how access to justice can impact the day-to-day lives of so many people, I think it all just came together for me that that's the sort of work that I wanted to be doing. And then the pro bono work I gravitated towards combined all those various interests. So I was doing a lot of special immigrant juvenile status work for child refugees. So combined my interest in, international development, working with children, and access to justice, of course.
Now, you mentioned that you made a pivot and you became the firm's Pro Bono Associate, your current role. That is a very unique title. There aren't many people with that title. And I'm hoping we could hear more about how you got the job and what is it?
Sure. So I think I have probably one of the best jobs in the world. I feel very lucky, and it is fairly unique that I am the firm's first Pro Bono Associate, and I haven't met very many other Pro Bono Associates, which, as you mentioned. So how I got the job is just that, it became available and I applied and was lucky enough to get it. But what I do is a little bit of everything. Emily Goldberg is our pro bono counsel, so my boss and I'm her number two, and we together do everything from seeking out the right opportunities for the firm and its pro bono work, and then working through the process of all of our various representations. But specifically, my focus in the past year has been primarily on our immigration work, and we've been focusing a lot on some new clinics that we've been launching. So we've been working with our corporate clients on a number of different initiatives, some immigration ones, including asylum and U visa, and other related issues. And then also we've been doing a lot of transgender legal name changes. So those two areas have been my primary focus. And then, in addition to all of the day-to-day management that these programs take.
So could you sort of paint a picture for us about your day and what it looks like? And I know it's sort of like no 2 days are the same, but sort of let's pretend, if we were filming the movie of BJ's Tuesday, how do you spend your time? What's filling your time?
It's so cliche to say that no 2 days are the same, but it is really true. But I think it's a bit seasonal and cyclical. So, for example, right now the new associates the first years are about to arrive, and so a lot of my time is focused on preparing for their arrival. And similarly, when the summers were coming, we were doing that. And it's also shifts depending on what's happening in the world. So obviously, if there's a particular pro bono need that's arisen, I'll have to pivot to focus on that more. But in terms of the tasks I'm doing, there's a lot of emails and a lot of calls and kind of problem solving and digging in with our various teams working on problems to help guide them to the right resources or strategize and work through, any challenges they might be having. A lot of meetings too, dealing with all of those different things. So it's a very extroverted role, and that's turned out to be one of my favorite parts of this job is all the different people I get to interact with. But most of my time is now spent talking or communicating in some way or another with all sorts of different people.
Yeah, it's really true, right? One of the biggest either skill sets or functions of these positions is as a communications, communicator.
Yeah.
And particularly
my first week after I started this job, I had to cancel all social plans and just sit at home quietly to recover because I was it's just a shift. When you're a litigation associate, you spend a lot of time drafting or researching or doing all those things, but by yourself. Of course, you're on teams, but it's just it's a real energetic shift. So I'm used to it now, but at first I was a bit shell-shocked.
Yeah, it's true. It's super social in that way,
Yeah. Exactly.
Exactly. So you mentioned, I'm curious and was hoping you could elaborate a little on setting up clinics. You talked about some immigration-related ones. You talked about name change ones. What goes into that? What are sort of the elements if you're going to create a project like that? Not sort of the minute task list, but what are the elements or functions that go into creating something like that?
Sure, that's a great question. In no particular order, I think one of the first things is identifying a need. So in all the cases we've done a clinic model, we're responding to a need that's been identified either by us working with our clients or more often by our legal services partners to a need they're seeing in the community that they think a client model might be helpful for. And so identifying that need and then making sure that we have the right partner organization to work with. So there are communications, that happen there. Making sure that we have the expertise or can acquire the expertise to do whatever work is required. So that's, figuring out what the training is going to look like and how the mentorship, if that's the model we're going with from the legal services organization, will work going forward in the project, assuming it's not a one-day clinic and there's an ongoing representation associated with it, and then making sure that we have the clients and that all language needs. Often we have non-English speaking clients participating, so that's logistically a big piece of it. Making sure that we've thought through any needs particular to that client population in terms of welcoming them into the law firm, staffing it with our folks, and then all the many small details that come into putting on a big event, because then it does shift into a bit of event management at a certain moment.
So that's right. In addition to being an expert communicator, you also have to be an event planner and a marketer. Yeah. So
exactly.
I so appreciate that you gave such a client-centered answer and that you started with there needs to be a need. Because I think one of the pro bono worst practices are when people dream up a project, but there's no actual client pool. Right? They're really, it's not what the community and the people in the field kind of think is an urgent, unaddressed need. It's just something that sounded good or someone read it somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? It's like a backwards way of approaching it, I think. And that leads to a lot of lost energy and time and kind of transaction costs that don't
definitely
bear fruit. And in this arena, we can't afford to do that. We need to be efficient. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, and clinics are just quite labor intensive. Once you've done them a couple of times, they start to run themselves a little bit more. But as you say, it's a sad waste of resources on all sides if it's not actually responding to need. And I think Emily does this too, and I definitely try to be as humble as possible and deferential as possible to our legal services partners, because they're really, on the front lines. They're interacting with clients more than we are, and they know they're the subject matter experts. So we really try as a sort of an orienting principle to focus on meeting the needs that are being identified by those folks.
So we've talked about reading emails, sending emails, talking to people, talking to so many people. I just want to go home and binge watch TV and have, no human interaction, and event planning and working with legal services organizations. It's so much, right? Like, it's so demanding. There's so many ways you could slice and dice your day, which I'm sure is very long. What do you wish you could be doing more of, if only you had more time? If you could clone yourself and have, BJ 2.0, what would he be doing?
He would be probably interacting with clients one-on-one more. So I definitely still get to do that sometimes, but that is certainly the most motivating part of the time I spend and my favorite part. So if I, can just have more in a dream world, I would have more face time with individual clients.
So if you could elaborate, this may answer the next question. It could be time with individual clients, but what motivates and inspires you?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the individuals. I think, I don't know, the legal system can just be so overwhelming to anyone, but particularly when the stakes are as high as they are for so many of the clients we see. And just the sense of, relief and solace and confidence and strength that clients take from knowing that they have one of our attorneys or more than one of our attorneys on their side is so incredibly motivating. And then seeing the impact that we're able to have, whether it be in an individual, like housing repair case or something, or on a broader, nationwide impact case, it's I don't know, it may sound cheesy, but it's like the power of law to affect individuals is so motivating and inspiring for me.
What do you enjoy most about your job?
I think, now that I've gotten used to it and I'm no longer exhausted from it, all the different people I get to interact with. So it's, everyone from the clients that I was just talking about to, so many more Paul Weiss attorneys than I did when I was just doing my former practice, to all the different other folks at Paul Weiss that exist to make this operation work, on our management and operations side, to all of the, incredible legal services folks. So, whether it's the mentoring attorneys or, our counterparts that have more of a pro bono management role there, it's really, dynamic, and it's inspiring to meet so many different people and interact with so many different people every day.
Have we hit your 1 year mark?
Yeah, so I'm 13 months now.
13 months. Okay, happy anniversary. I was like, I knew it was around now. Because I remember when we met in November of last year in your offices, it was, new. So yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. That's amazing. So it is an interesting feeling, right, when you've kind of gone through the year cycle, how you've climbed the learning curve and can kind of adjust and things seem different. It's, I think, true with a lot of jobs, but particularly these positions where there's a lot coming at you fast, as they say. What are your greatest challenges?
This is like a very mundane answer, but it's the number of emails. That is the single biggest challenge, I think, because I want to, of course, be as responsive and helpful as possible. But the volume is unlike anything I ever could have imagined.
Internal, external, the combination?
Probably majority internal with some external, I don't know, it would be hard to put a percentage on it, but maybe 65-35 or 70-30.
Have you developed any tricks that have helped with email management, or that's on this year's to-do list?
Yeah, I think that's on this year's. Just waking up in the middle of the night, panicking and remembering that I had forgotten to respond to some email. I know some colleagues keep a zero inbox or whatever that's properly referred to, and I'm very inspired by those folks, but I am not that person. So I'm in desperate need of tricks, and I just do my best.
Yeah, I'm always intrigued by the
worst
people.
Strategy ever.
Yeah, no. I'm always intrigued by the people who declare, what do they call it, email bankruptcies?
Oh, I've never heard of that, but that's hilarious.
I don't understand how lawyers can do it, but it's people who just basically just delete everything. And they have an audit responder that's like, I've deleted everything prior to blah, so start over.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I know. I think that ethically probably you're right. The lawyers can't do that.
I don't know. It's like a risk management nightmare. So I think
exactly.
It's a non-starter, but you always wonder, like, really? What kind of gig do you have that you can just do that?
You can just pretend, press restart. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually think, in the evolution of email, it has made sort of pro bono leaders' jobs harder because there's this kind of tune out of email, right? We just have so many that it's become a black hole of communication sometimes. So, you being people in your position will send out emails and hear nothing back, because it's easy to delete or not read or ignore. And so often, people like emails because you can hit a lot of people in theory with one, send, but the penetration isn't very great. If you go door to door, you're getting a lot deeper contact, but it's very hard to hit, 800 people door to door. So the payoff, the kind of cost benefit analysis is really a challenge. And I think email management is really hard with, how you use it effectively now. Hard.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that what we're seeing here is that the personal relationships really help. The same way that, like, if I get an email from someone I know, I'm more liable to read it carefully than if I just know it's a blast, that it's from some anonymous source. So I like to pretend that because I know so many people at the firm, they read my emails. But we also definitely find ourselves pursuing a bunch of different routes and means of communication. So, a combination of emails and lunches, like working group lunches and breakfasts and phone calls and in-person conversations and that kind of thing.
So our producer Misha, is a communication expert, and she is nodding like, yeah. Experts spend a lot of time and energy trying to figure all this out. So it's
definitely
great. Yeah, let's piggyback on their knowledge. So in the 13 months that you have been the Pro Bono Associate at Paul Weiss, what surprised you about running a law firm pro bono program?
Obviously, Paul Weiss has had this long strong commitment to pro bono. It's really part of the culture and the history of the firm, and I knew that as a litigator, and I knew that before I even came to the firm. So that is certainly just the case. But until I had this role, I don't think I appreciated just how deep that commitment was throughout the management of the firm. In terms of what I've witnessed specifically is that the management of the firm is so willing to act quickly and decisively and with resources to respond to pressing pro bono needs. So really what I'm trying to say is that I've been moved, I think is the right way to put it, by how committed the leadership of the firm is to pro bono. And so that's a Paul Weiss specific answer, but that's what I've been really struck by, especially in this, moment where there are so many vital needs and the rights of various vulnerable populations are, threatened with increasing regularity. Having that commitment has been really powerful.
So I love your point about leadership commitment to pro bono, and it is the perfect segue to what I want to talk about next. And we did not plan this, so that's amazing. We're very, very in sync. But last winter, you were involved in efforts to respond to what's known as the Muslim travel ban and what I often like to call airport advocacy. And during that, a memo was made public that the firm chair, Brad Karp, sent, thanking firm lawyers for their efforts, which consisted of descending on JFK and Dulles airports to assist people who were being detained. More than 50 Paul Weiss lawyers participated, and Brad Karp called out several by name, including pro bono lawyers Emily Goldberg and BJ Jensen. He wrote that you two, quote, worked tirelessly and without sleep to organize and coordinate these efforts with internally and across several nonprofit partners. The note concludes that the work continues, and we have had teams of lawyers working in shifts around the clock. Unfortunately, there will be additional opportunities to get involved, and we will continue to keep you apprised as the need arises. So I was hoping, you could reminisce a bit and share this experience and elaborate on what it means to you to have the head of the firm, recognize your contributions.
Sure. Well, it's funny. Yeah, we are in sync, essentially, because this is exactly what I was thinking of when I gave my previous answer. I guess to start with your second question, Brad is an incredible leader for the firm, and to be recognized by him is very meaningful. So that was very kind of him to say, and really did mean a lot. In terms of the time surrounding the airport first travel ban, like I said, that's exactly what I was thinking of. Within, a couple of hours of learning of what was happening, we had sign-off from the highest levels of the firm to have attorneys on the ground at the airports. We had one of our DC partners escort a group of associates to Dulles, and we had one of our senior litigators here in New York, senior litigation partners. I think he spent like 13 hours on the ground at JFK with other associates. And we were having these briefing calls with associates around the clock before they went out, explaining, what their role would be. And this same senior litigator was participating on these calls with me, like literally in the middle of the night and in the middle of the day, so 24 hours a day. And the firm leadership was incredible. We had so many partners reviewing documents and just being on call and available to support the associate response was tremendous. It was, I think, 50 associates on the ground within the first maybe 36 hours, and that number just continued to grow over the coming week. We had teams staffing the airports around the clock, and the response was just tremendously moving. And yeah, personally, it was a weird time because it was all just evolving so quickly. And so, everyone knows that there was a stay that was granted that Saturday night. And then Sunday morning, we learned that folks were being deported, at least at JFK, in violation of that stay. So attorneys were starting to file temporary restraining orders, or TROs, with the Eastern District of New York, so EDNY, and I went in person. I live in Brooklyn, so I went to go file one on a colleague's behalf, and I realized once I got there that there was no enforcement mechanism in place. So what actually was happening was that the security guards were telling me that, it was a Sunday and the court was closed on a Sunday. And so, no, they wouldn't accept our filings. We had to come back on Monday morning, and they didn't care that I said that folks were going to be deported. They didn't want to bother a judge on a Sunday. And so what I wound up having to do was camp out at the courthouse waiting to see anyone I thought might be a judge, and eventually I found a judge who called the right judge, and she came in and started hearing these applications, and I think were able to successfully block the removal of folks on the Sunday. But I say all this just to illustrate it was such a crazy time, and I don't think anyone was really prepared had thought through all of the different parts of it. But the commitment of the legal community was so inspiring during that time.
That always happens with kind of emergencies and things on the fly, that in the moment you're just doing the best you can. And when the dust settles, You're like, oh yeah. So I wanted to ask, are you literally just camped out because you figure surely someone's coming to work on a Sunday or coming to pick something up, or...
my logic was that I couldn't leave, that wasn't an option. And so I obviously had my cell phone, everyone has their cell phone all the time. So but it was early, it was like crack of dawn on Sunday. And so I was calling, Police obviously has a network of former clerks. So I was calling anyone I knew who had clerked at the EDNY who may have some sort of contact, and we had this sort of phone tree going, and we had different potential options, but then I was also jumping on anyone who, well, not literally of course, but saddling up, I guess, to anyone who was walking in the building. So I found a clerk or two, and that wasn't turning anything up, and then eventually a judge came in. So I think my logic was just that I couldn't leave until we had a solution, but getting to that solution, I guess I didn't really have a clear route in mind.
It's also a lesson that lawyers need to be persistent.
Yeah.
You can't just be like, okay, security guard, thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
So BJ, I was curious. I've been thinking a lot, getting ready to speak with you, and I was curious if you've read or heard about a new book called Refugee by Alan Gratz. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not, but I'm looking it up right now as we speak.
Okay, great. I want to tell you about it and tell our listeners about it. Because I think sometimes, and I knew that you did a lot of work for immigrants, including, airport advocacy and also your individual client representations. And I think sometimes it's hard for us to explain to people how we as lawyers work to make the world a better place. And I think it's especially hard for our kids to understand. This is why I'm not going to be home until late, or this is why I have to go on this trip. Like, I'm so sorry. I mean, all kids feel that about their parents' jobs. But this book is amazing. It's for young readers. It's YA, but it's a great read for anybody. And a great reviewer. She's from New York. She's amazing. Marjorie Engel. I love her. She captured what's great about this book this way. There are explosions, sharks, gunshots, paranoia, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle merchandise, armed robberies, a cute kitten, tear gas bombs, greased doorknob pranks, a bar mitzvah, and a bad guy so bad he beheads a child stuffed animal. I mean, who wouldn't want more than that? It's amazing. It's basically the story, fictionalized, of 3 child refugees. One, a boy fleeing the Holocaust on the St. Louis, and we all know what happens to that ship, so that's hard. A girl fleeing Cuba on a boat trying to get to Florida, and a Syrian boy in sort of modern day current events, trying to get to Europe. And it's just brilliant the way the time travels. To me, it seems a little dangerous. I don't know if I was young. I mean, scary. But it's a super quick read. And I think, those are our clients. And it really humanizes the lives that lawyers save. So if you need a quick read, go to your library, put it on hold. That's how I read it. It's just really great. Refugee by Alan Gratz. I recommend.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Sure. I know we talked about, what happens with the travel ban, and you mentioned, it's just been such a busy time for all of us because there's so much going on. You just read the newspaper and this. Have there been other, not necessarily a crisis, but a crisis or an emergency or something sudden that has kind of changed your attention or forced you to deploy resources, something unscheduled that's happened that shifted your portfolio or to-do list?
I feel like that happens every day. So I'm trying to think of a good specific example. One example, I have a couple of cases that representations that I had when I was a litigation associate that have continued, that I've just, kept in this role as well. And most of them are SIJ cases, so those special immigrant juvenile status cases. And in those cases, your clients are obviously under the age of 21, and I have a couple of teenage clients. And so the example that I also am pulled into these kinds of situations on our other SIJ cases often. So what we have with those kids who, if I can just bracket for a second, are some of I find the most inspiring clients for all the reasons you just talked about with the Refugee book. These children are just so incredibly resilient, and the clients that we have, our SIJ clients, have survived unimaginable violence or mistreatment in their home countries, and then have bravely traveled through similarly unimaginable circumstances to get here, and then come and are often just, like your typical teenager, and they're dealing with all the drama that a typical teenager would deal with. So fights with their parents, or, fights with their friend at school, or they don't want to, it's normally fights with the parents. And so we often get kids calling us just in a bit of a state. And that is the sort of thing that has caused me to have to sort of drop things and reorganize things to deal with an urgent issue. And, it's tough because obviously we're not social workers and but we are trusted adults in their lives. And when a kid calls you and needs help, you respond. That's what I think most people do. So that's what comes to mind.
That's a great point. And I think also that's what lawyers do. When clients call you, you drop everything and you serve their needs. So
exactly.
Pro Bono clients, paying clients, corporate clients, that is our role. We are legal service providers. And sometimes it's very 9 to 5 and sometimes, whoop, there's an emergency. There's an urgent need.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what are some additional examples of pro bono matters that have been particularly meaningful to you over the course of your career, either ones you've worked on or ones now over 13 months that you've seen or facilitated other people at the firm doing that have spoken to you? So tell us some stories.
Yeah, again, there's so many. I think, we've talked about often the ones that I come back to all the time are that first weekend for the travel ban or the FIDGE cases that I see and touch. Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard to pick because I find myself often thinking of our individual clients. And so, one example, we had an asylum client who was in just a very challenging life situation and had also experienced, really difficult things, and she struggled. But I guess this happens on so many cases. I don't know that it's particularly unique, but she just really had struggled to tell her story and testify openly, and it just took so much effort from so many people to get her comfortable. And for a number of complicated reasons, she wound up having to have multiple merits hearings, which is not typical. And when she eventually was granted asylum, it was one of the most powerful experiences of my professional career, just seeing her relief and joy. And it may have stuck with me because it was one of the first cases I became involved with in my new role. But it's the individuals that really stick with you. But then at the same time, we did a voting rights case in Florida in the fall that was over a long weekend, and I think the team had 72 hours to pull it together, and the dedication there was incredibly inspiring. Same with a number of other briefs that have happened over the past year, where literally we have a day or two to pull it together, and people are just willing to work around the clock to get it done. But again, I think for me, it comes back to the individuals. I'm inspired by our clients. I'm inspired by my colleagues.
Yeah, and I think sometimes those, boom, we're going to full court press 72 hours and get this done. That is a sign of dedication and commitment, right? It's not a project I can just do at my convenience. It's like I have to check out of my life to focus.
Exactly.
And that means it's important, and we are willing to do whatever it takes. I want to follow up on something we talked about, much earlier on, but I think that it will be a way to help educate some of our listeners who aren't familiar with this area of legal need or the work that you're doing. And we glossed over it, but we didn't really explain, and that is you talked about name change project. Could you kind of put some details and kind of background for people who aren't familiar with that?
Sure. So the name changes that we're doing are with transgender clients. So those are folks who identify with, it's a big umbrella category, so that's why I'm pausing a sec. I just want to make sure that I'm capturing everyone. But it's folks who don't identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth. So they may identify with the other gender, or they may identify, somewhere along the gender spectrum, and who have decided that they want to legally change their name to better reflect their identity. And so the first step in New York is that you have to go to a court and have the court order that name change. And the reason that name changes are so significant for our clients, or for trans folks in general, are for a lot of, seemingly mundane reasons. I think most people don't think about how often they're asked to show ID or use some sort of, identification or payment method that has a legal name on it. And so everything from like paying with something at a restaurant or a store to buying tickets or checking into a hotel, traveling, all of that receiving mail at your house, working, all of that is done normally in your legal name, and for somebody whose legal name doesn't match their gender identity and gender expression and presentation, that can expose them to, at the lower end, embarrassment, and at the extreme end, discrimination and violence. So the legal name change is the first step, at least in New York, to getting all of that identification to match your lived experience and your identity. So it can be incredibly powerful. And the process itself is actually fairly simple for a legal process. There's a fairly basic petition that you fill out, maybe a couple of other documents are required, and you go to a hearing where the judges hear normally a lot of different name change petitions at once, and normally grant them all on the spot. Sometimes there are publication requirements and other notification requirements, and sometimes not. But for a lay person, or even, frankly, an attorney, it can be stressful to encounter this process, especially when the stakes feel so personally high. It's an issue of such personal significance. So what we do is we have a whole ton of lawyers here that are doing these kinds of cases, and we work with TELDEF on them, and so they refer us a number of trans clients, and we just help them work their way through the process. And like I said, it's not a super complicated process, so for the attorneys, it doesn't take them a huge amount of time, but to have a lawyer with you through that process is just really powerful, and it's a really positive experience for our clients, and really, it's quite literally life-changing for most of our clients. So.
Oh, I'm so grateful. Thank you for putting context and explaining the whole work of the project, because I think sometimes people don't fully understand how powerful that can be, and the real legal need that it's serving and the real difference that it can make. So I think understanding the real value of the work is incredibly powerful. So I think that's great and really helpful to know. So we've been looking to the past, but so let's switch up and look to the future. What's on the horizon for the firm's pro bono program? Tell us about one or two new things that you have in the works.
Sure. So as we've talked about, I'm, 13 months in to my role here. Emily is 18 months in, and then we've just hired this past spring 2 additional team members. So we're really in a growth and development phase as a program. Of course, as I've said, and as is well known, Weiss has this long history of excellent pro bono work. But as a program ourselves, we're really growing and developing. There are so many exciting things planned for this year. I think it's hard to just pick a couple, but it's going to be a year of continued growth and development for us.
Well, that's great. Well, I can't wait to have you back and learn about the growth and development and talk to your other team members. And it's super exciting time.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how I feel.
So, BJ, if you had a magic wand, what one thing would you change about access to justice or pro bono?
So my probably very unrealistic wish, I think, would be that no one should ever have to encounter the legal system without the assistance of an attorney. I think that's what I would change.
That's great. Lawyers for everybody. Great.
Lawyers for everybody, everywhere.
Yeah.
Yep.
Full
it's a big
access.
Wish, but that's if I had a magic wand, that's what I would use it for.
That's why it's magic. That's a good use of it. So, BJ, let's end with this. Who is your pro bono role model? Feel free to pick more than one, and why?
Sure. So that, I feel like, is maybe the toughest question you've asked, because as I said, I have just had the privilege of meeting so many incredibly inspiring people this past 13 months. I think if I had to choose one, I would choose the senior litigation partner that I referenced earlier, who sort of led the charge at JFK. The partner's name is Bob Atkins, and I previously worked with him as a litigation associate, and he's one of the smartest, most capable and impressive attorneys I had ever encountered. Be it working on paying or pro bono work, but witnessing him now in my new role has just been even more inspiring. Like that weekend, he was the one that was on the calls with me, briefing associates at all hours. He was on the ground at JFK for hours. He drafted the habeas petition that wound up being used by many of the legal services organizations throughout that week at JFK. He's a leader in our voting rights work. So that story that I was remembering about that weekend, long weekend, where he had or where a team pulled together a brief, he was leading that charge, and he's doing things all the time. And it's in his blood to do pro bono work. And I think just his commitment and attitude towards it is what I find most inspiring.
What a great choice. And it reminds me that pro bono leaders see the best of our profession, right? You see the amazing dedication and commitment of your colleagues and how they just go above and beyond. So I think sharing your story about Bob, you get to see that side, the full side.
Well, and he's incredible. Like, he's one of those people who gets so excited to be discussing legal strategy, which is contagious. He's someone who loves being an attorney and is an excellent attorney, and then that makes you want to try harder and care even more. And so his enthusiasm is infectious no matter what he's working on, and to have that energy and commitment in the pro bono space is really powerful, I think.
Yeah, passionate people and lawyers who love being lawyers, it's contagious. That's a force.
Yeah, exactly.
We should
Two great qualities.
We should surround ourselves with more of them. Well, BJ, thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been so inspiring and a pleasure.
Same here. Thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much to BJ for making the time to be with us and sharing his stories. New and archived episodes of the podcast can be found on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Remember to subscribe and leave a review. Hey listeners, we've gotten some great mail from you, and we'd love even more. Send your comments, feedback, and suggestions to pro bono at probonoinst.org. For all of us here at PBI, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Pro Bono Happy Hour.